Today, executive producer Matt Katz and I are visiting Carpenters Hall, where the First Continental Congress was held back in 1774. This building at 3rd and Chestnut Streets is considered the acorn of American democracy, and every Tuesday and Thursday through May, it stays open late for small group tours and a whiskey tasting in its normally closed second-floor library. Our guide today is Carpenters Hall Executive Director Michael Norris. It's Tuesday, April 22nd. I'm Trenae Nuri, and here's what Philly's learning and drinking.
All right, Trenae, we're at the birthplace of American democracy.
Never knew that this place existed.
Why are we here?
We are going to step foot in a secret second-floor library.
For?
To drink whiskey.
God bless America. All right, let's go ahead.
Okay.
So we're standing in Carpenters Hall. This building was constructed in the early 1770s by the Carpenters Company, modeled on a trade guild from London that dates to, I think, about 1470 or something crazy like that. And it did a couple of main things, like most guilds did. Set standards for quality and excellence. The members trained apprentices, so there was always, sort of new blood coming into the profession. And they provided mutual aid to each other, right? If someone got sick or died, they would help out their family or whatever. And then in the early 1770s, we built this building, right? And it was designed to be a meeting hall, right? We happened to, maybe somewhat coincidentally, allow the First Continental Congress to meet here, right? And so the building was finished in the spring of 1774. That fall, we hosted the Continental Congress, right? We had also designed the building to be a place that people rented and used. It made sense for there to be tenants. In fact, the very first tenant was the Library Company of Philadelphia, founded by Benjamin Franklin. The second significant tenant was the First Continental Congress. And yes, we did charge them money to rent the space.
How much?
It was 8 shillings. Don't ask me what that translates to now, but that's how much we charged them per week. The reason there even was a Continental Congress, so this is where we get a little history nerdy, but so in December of 1773, the Boston Tea Party happens, right? England's really mad at Boston, so for ruining all that tea, so they pass a bunch of acts to essentially punish Boston. And those acts shut down the port of Boston. They brought British troops into the city of Boston. And this set alarm bells off, across the colonies. People thinking like, oh my God, if they do that in Boston, they could do that anywhere, right? So we got to get together and figure out how we're going to deal with this. So there was a call put out for this Continental Congress. Philadelphia was chosen to be the host city. We were the biggest city at that time in the colonies. We were halfway up and down the seaboard, so, sort of convenient geographically. So the delegates descended here in September of 1774. Not really knowing the choice of the location of the meeting was actually not known until the delegates got here. It was kind of like the hot new thing, right? So they decided to meet here. 56 people from 12 of the 13 colonies for about 7 weeks, right, in the fall of 1774. And that, of course, is people like George Washington, John Adams, Samuel Adams, Patrick Henry, right? A lot of the, sort of usual suspects of founding fathers were part of the First Continental Congress. And the purpose of the meeting, broadly stated, was to try to find a sort of a peaceful or diplomatic resolution to these grievances between the colonies and England. This was before the American Revolution actually started, right? So there was a little inkling of what we call the I word, independence, but not a whole lot, right? So what did sort of stick and what was kind of the main outcome of the First Continental Congress was they formed this thing called the Continental Association. And they signed a document that formed that association called the Articles of Association, which has been somewhat forgotten, but in our opinion, should be right up there with the Declaration and the Constitution as one of our founding documents. Because what the Articles of Association did, which had not been done before, was really bind the colonies together, right, into this thing, the Continental Association, that had a governance structure, had shared communication, shared strategy, right? For the first time, the colonies were saying, we're going to work together, we're going to figure this out together, we're going to have one voice, we're going to have one approach to what we're trying to solve. So the association, even though the political objectives of the Congress weren't achieved, right? We went to war, we fought for independence. The association, essentially became the United States, right? There's a wonderful quote from David McCullough, the famous historian, who called Carpenters Hall the acorn of American democracy for that reason, which I love that. So that is really the significance of what happened here.
Can you just talk about the chaos of getting 12 colonies together during a war to establish America?
Yeah, I think it shows the extent to which people were upset, right, and wanted to do something and realized that they needed to act, together, right? And maybe perhaps to our current situation, I feel like, those delegates realized that they had to band together. They had to create some sense of unity, even if they couldn't agree on everything, because they wouldn't be able to achieve those objectives, whether it was diplomatic in the First Continental Congress case or independence in the second. They wouldn't be able to achieve those things if they were at odds with each other, right? And so they had to come together and find that kind of common ground, right? And I think that really drove them to do that.
Just beyond 4th Street is Independence Hall, and you said it was occupied also by the British.
Correct.
How did they protect Carpenters Hall?
So we didn't. Carpenters Hall was also occupied by the British. That was during after the war had already started. So in 1777 is when the British occupation took place in Philadelphia, right? And basically, the British used these buildings to house soldiers or store supplies. Our building in particular was used as an infirmary. So wounded British soldiers, this was, sort of like a hospital, right, for wounded British soldiers. The occupation was from, sort of fall of 1777 into the spring of 1778. Most of our members at the Carpenters Company were in favor of independence. That's not true 100%, but because a lot of folks who were working as builders at that time were immigrants or descendants of immigrants, of people who had come from Ireland and Scotland, not necessarily big fans of the British, if you know anything about that history, but, so they were inclined to be in favor of independence. And many of our members were actively involved, right, in the revolution, on the side of the colonies. In fact, the guy who designed this building, whose name was Robert Smith, was an immigrant from Scotland. That's why we have Scotch on the tour when we get to that. He not only was a really talented builder, right, of buildings. He designed this building. He designed St. Peter's Church right down here, and a number of other sites in Philadelphia and beyond. But he also worked for the Continental Army, and he designed defenses that were installed in the Delaware River to stop British warships, from coming into the harbor, right? So he was very actively involved in supporting the revolution, as many of our members were. The Carpenters Company met here and actually continues to meet here. What we were in the 18th century, of course, has evolved. We don't have guilds anymore. We don't have master builders anymore. But what we do have are architects, engineers, and contractors, right? And those folks are our members today, right? So we are still a very active membership association. We have about 220 members currently, and they're all leading architects, engineers, and contractors from the Philadelphia area.
Can you describe some of the features of this building?
Architecturally, right, so classic Georgian design, everything's perfectly symmetrical. The building itself is built on a square footprint, so equal sides, 50 feet on each side, equal number of windows, everything's balanced, right? So that's a very typical design of Georgian architecture. The large Palladian fan window over the doors, again, very common in the 18th century, and one of the more stunning features that we have, I think. So we're standing right here by one of our sort of favorite artifacts, right? This is a chair.
It's a big chair. It's a tall chair.
That was made for the hall and was used in the First Continental Congress. It's designed to be higher, right? So the person who sits in that chair is important, right? So this is the speaker's chair or the president's chair that was used by this guy, Peyton Randolph, who you see here in this portrait. He was the president of the First Continental Congress, elected by the other delegates. One of the delegates from Virginia, along with George Washington and Patrick Henry and others. So Robert Smith, the guy who built Carpenters Hall, actually also built Franklin's house, right? And they actually have a very funny letter in the Franklin archives at the American Philosophical Society. I love this. I show this to our members all the time. It's a letter that Franklin wrote from London to Deborah, his wife, who, so he's in London, she's here, she's overseeing the construction of these houses. And in this letter, Franklin complains about Robert Smith, right? And how he's like over budget, behind schedule, and right, just like the same things that people complain about today, right? When they're complaining about their contractor, right? He was doing that, 250 years ago. So I think that's hilarious.
After the break, we head up to the second floor of Carpenters Hall, to the library, which the public normally doesn't see. Mother's Day is coming up, so to celebrate and honor her, gift her with something special, like an Aura digital picture frame. My mom lives in a different time zone, so when she comes to visit us in Philly, we take lots of pictures. I love the one where we're all squeezed on a couch watching Sunday Night Football. Aura Frames was named the best digital photo frame by Wirecutter, and it was featured in 495 gift guides last year. So the next time you need to call your mom, you can also send her a picture of your son at his lacrosse game right from your phone. Aura has a great deal for Mother's Day. For a limited time, listeners can save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off plus free shipping on their best-selling Carver mat frame. That's auraframes.com. Promo code CityCast. Support the show by mentioning us at checkout. Terms and conditions apply.
What sort of promises have you made to yourself this year? Getting in better shape, eating healthier, saving more money, traveling somewhere new? What about discovering a new culture by learning a new language? With Babbel, you can do that in just a few weeks. I'm David Plotz, the CEO of CityCast, and I've been learning Spanish with Babbel. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons, handcrafted by over 200 language experts, get you to begin speaking your new language in 3 weeks or whatever pace you choose. And because conversing is the key to really understanding each other in new languages, Babbel is designed using practical, real-world conversations. The Spanish I learned on Babbel really helped me on a recent trip to Mexico City, ordering in restaurants, shopping at the textile market, cheering on at the Lucha Libre, and I've been keeping it up since I got home. You're a podcast listener. I know that because you're listening here. I bet you'll love Babbel's new podcasts. On Eavesdrop in Espanol, which I listen to, you get to listen to a real conversation, then have the teacher host explain back to you. Then you listen again and catch everything. And you can even read along in the transcript. It's a really fun and effective way to learn. Let's get more of you talking in a new language. Babbel is gifting CityCast listeners 60% off subscriptions at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/CityCast. Spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Babbel.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
This is the second floor of Carpenters Hall. This space is not open to our general visitors. So it's one of the main reasons people come on the tour is because they get to come up here. The books in here are pretty rare, most of them old, right? We have about 5,000 books, which is not large in terms of libraries, but it's pretty eclectic and diverse in terms of the subject matter. There's books for kids, and we have novels and travel and, just a whole range of topics. So it's also kind of a snapshot into what people at that time thought was important, right? Things that should be included in a library collection. The red books that you're looking at right now, this crazy collection of volumes, actually commissioned by Napoleon, of all people, when he conquered Egypt. He made this is basically like a catalog of Egypt, right? So as the new emperor, right, of Egypt, he wanted to know everything that was there, right? So he took people with him and they wrote all about the architecture and the plants and the animals and the people and, sort of everything. We have a first edition of William Still's History of the Underground Railroad, right, which came out in 1872, like boom, right in this period. One of our more treasured books, this is a reprint of Andrea Palladio's. He published 6 folios about architecture in the Renaissance period that wasn't, they were influential for centuries and continue to be in many ways. But, you can see that they just had very detailed drawings and instructions and designs for how to build, different things. So what's great about this particular one is that it belonged to Robert Smith, right, who was our master builder. You can see he wrote his name right there. So this is one of our prized volumes. So then the last part of the tour happens over here, the fun part. And we're going to get to more Franklin over here. Oh, I should pour you some whiskey, right? The guy holding the mic, are you allowed?
You bet.
Drinking with my boss.
All right.
That's not the first or last time.
Well, cheers, you guys. Thanks
Cheers.
for being here. So, to continue the story. So Franklin, was not at the First Continental Congress, right? So he was not a delegate here because he was still in London. He didn't come back to Philadelphia until the spring of 1775, right when everything was heating up. That's when, the revolution started in April. Second Continental Congress convened in May. He came back to Philadelphia, immediately joined the Second Continental Congress, and was given a job. His job, because he was Franklin and had lived in England for so long and was already famous, right, as a kind of a scientist and inventor, and had connections all across Europe, he was given a job by the Continental Congress of engaging with France and figuring out, if we could convince France to be our ally in the revolution. England and France were enemies, right? They had France had lost the French and Indian War in the 1760s, and so the thinking was, if they, the enemy of my enemy, right, is my friend, right? So it's conceivable that France would be our ally because they hate England. So Franklin was charged with figuring this out. So he convinces the French foreign minister to send over a guy to meet with the Continental Congress, right? And so this French ambassador, sometimes called a spy, he traveled in secret because they didn't want the British to know that we were meeting with the France. So if you ever hear about the spy at Carpenters Hall, it's this guy. His name was Bonvillard. He came to Philadelphia in December of 1775, so 250 years ago this year. And he met with Franklin. They have these meetings in this room. The guy, Bonvillard, goes back to France and he files a report, which basically sort of sets up, round two of the discussion, where Franklin went to France. Right? So after almost a year later, Franklin went to France, right, to continue the negotiations. And he ended up staying there for 5 years, something like that, until the war was over. But part of that involved ultimately signing this alliance, right, with France, which, we wouldn't be the United States without France, essentially, right, because they sent over weapons and ships and soldiers and gunpowder and right. But the origins of all of that, right, date to those meetings, right, that took place right here, thanks to Dr. Franklin.
What is the connection to this whiskey?
Well, essentially, since Robert Smith was from Scotland, we drink scotch on the tour, right, in sort of honor of him. I think in general, for us, it was a way to, just kind of a fun way to engage visitors, right, and to kind of show off the building in a way that felt a little bit special and secret. And not open to the general public. As we're standing around this table, right, having a little tipple, right, it's just, I don't know, people talk and I learn a lot and I hope people learn a lot, but it's a fun way to just engage with our visitors.
Thank you.
I think history sites, museums in general are just eager to engage people in fun, interesting ways. And especially now, right, it's since the pandemic, our visitation is still below pre-pandemic levels. So I think anything that feels fun and interesting and different is just a way to capture people's attention. And, this is certainly doing it for us.
More on this after the break.
Hey, CityCast. According to me and my calculator, you will spend more time this week between the sheets than you will at work. So upgrade your sheets to Cozy Earth. Luxury starts where you rest. I start my evening in buttery soft Cozy Earth bamboo pajamas. Then I dip into a Cozy Earth bamboo sheet set. They are silky and temperature regulating. Forget the 9 to 5. Prioritize your 5 to 9. Cozy Earth products will transform those hours into a sanctuary, and they take comfort seriously with a 100-night sleep trial and a 10-year warranty. Luxury should not be out of reach, so Cozy Earth is giving CityCast listeners 40% off their best-selling sheets, towels, pajamas, and more. Visit CozyEarth.com and use the code CozyPhilly for 40% off, because you deserve a great night's sleep, and sanctuary awaits at Cozy Earth.
So, it's a lot of history. How do you think about just where Carpenters Hall sits in the American timeline, given the political climate that we're in, when a lot of changes are happening on the federal level, which is just trickling down to the states, and even how we think about our country and the role of the government, even on the municipal levels as well?
Yeah, I think sort of one of the lessons of history is none of this is new, right? It might feel new and rough when you're living it, But the same kinds of stuff were being argued about. I mean, even at the First Continental Congress, right? One of the things they agreed to do collectively was to not import things from England and not to export to England, right? Sort of trying to wield some economic pressure, right? I mean, hello, tariffs, right? I mean, it's kind of the same. There's a tension there around what's good policy. How do we influence our agenda, right? So I think there's lessons to be learned there. And I again, ultimately, for me, I always go back to this sense of the association and the unity. And even though they didn't agree on everything, they did agree on many things, right? And I feel like that is still the foundation of our democracy, right? No matter what your political beliefs are or what party you're in, there are pieces of our foundational principles that are not up for question, and we all agree on those. And to me, that's sort of the ultimate kind of legacy of the First Continental Congress, because those guys agreed that we're going to form this association and we're going to agree to a set of actions and a set of principles in order to move forward, right? And of course, not everything worked out the way they wanted. All that stuff still happens. But I think the foundation of all of that is solid, and I'm still hoping and clinging to that, even in our sort of crazy climate at the moment.
So you're optimistic.
Yes, I mean, right. I mean, again, I feel like even though these lessons of history often repeat themselves, we do as a society and as a country ultimately. If you look at the long trajectory, it has been about increased participation in government, increased suffrage, right? The arm of justice, right? All of that, right? That is historically how it has played out, right? And I am, I hope not too naively, committed to that principle. And I think ultimately that will be our continued trajectory, even though it's looking a little grim right now.
I appreciate your lack of cynicism about the American experiment.
I mean, I just feel like it's either that or we just, climb into a hole. And I do, I talk to our visitors, we have people from all over the country, all over the world. Many of them are super MAGA, Trump supporters, whatever you want to say. And but even, I have had, we have civil conversations with them about this exact thing. Like, there are things that aren't up for discussion, and I think at the heart of it, everyone believes that, right? And it's kind of being tested right now, but I'm pretty sure we're gonna revert to what's true and unchangeable, about our system. So
It just feels like there's unprecedented things.
Some of it is definitely unprecedented for sure. Yeah, and it's I don't know, but I just feel like those guardrails and protocols, or whatever you want to call them, are going to be ultimately reinforced and hold. So, nice to meet you. Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you. Yeah, we're not going anywhere, so we'll be here.
All right, do you want to do final thoughts?
I feel like we have the privilege of living in the city that started this country and just putting us on the global map, essentially. It's important that we tell this story and continue the legacy and the stories of where democracy started.
Yeah, and I think during troubling times, it's comforting to take a really long perspective and look back at the sweep of history at 250 years, literally, and understand that times then were quite calamitous, and there have been ups and downs since then, and taking the longer view sometimes can be comforting. And maybe that's the point of coming here today. Or maybe that's just the Scotch talking.
It could be a Scotch. But I think despite those flavors, we're tasting freedom, and we got to keep tasting it to move forward.
Remind ourselves of the prior struggles. Mm-hmm. And on a much smaller point, I do appreciate a out-of-the-way tourist attraction, historical site that is luring visitors with Scotch tasting. And that's really not the point of this thing. We didn't learn anything really about Scotch. The point of it was to learn about American history, but they lured us in with the booze. Yeah. And I appreciate that effort. And I think more historical sites should give us booze. And we should just do a drunk history tour of Philadelphia.
Well, like always, Matt, thanks for joining me on this episode of CityCast Philly.
Thanks for having me, Trenae.
For more information about the Carpenters Hall, go to their website, carpentershall.org.
And you can join in on a whiskey tasting and a tour. $45 a piece.
Till the end of May.
We'll have a link in the show notes.
What an experience. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. If you enjoyed this episode about our trip to Carpenters Hall, tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter, Hey Philly, to learn more about what else Philly's talking about. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.